Welcome, everyone, to the Kentucky Kid, and what I promise will be a good show for all those of you who are sports nerds, such as myself. Just a heads up, it's going to be probably a statistically loaded show. I'm usually not one to try and load up shows with stats like this, but sometimes it's necessary. So, just let everybody know what's going on. But first, speaking of what was going on, and as you all know, about a week ago, I believe last week was fall break. Yeah, last week was fall break. It was the week that I didn't do any shows that week. It about killed me, to be honest. But there was one cool thing, at least, that came from fall break, in addition to getting to see old family and friends and that sort of thing. I was listening to the radio, and I was on the road. I was actually in the driveway from picking up my brother from his basketball practice. And one of the radio stations at home, I believe it's 107.3 The Point. It's a rock station, right? And every whatever night it was their 2-hour heavy metal segment. Well, I have a friend of mine who was in a heavy metal band, and I actually heard this song on the radio, and it was so cool to hear one of my friends on the radio. Now, I know I probably don't have a lot of fans of this show who are also heavy metal fans. I get that. But regardless of what your music taste is, if a friend of yours got on the radio, it would be cool regardless of what your music interest was. Just to hear his band on the radio was really, really cool. So, just thought I'd share that. Congratulations to Brian Judd. Finally having some success. He deserves it, man. One hell of a guitarist. He's the lead guitarist in this band. Congratulations to him and the band. If you want to listen to that song, it's "O Kingdom, A Place for No Man." You got to start somewhere, and it looks like they're starting pretty nicely. It's kind of like how this show's been. It had a slow start. I wasn't very good at the beginning, to be perfectly honest, but, I feel like I've improved a lot. Still got a long, long, long way to go, but I'm hopefully getting better. Again, we had to go with just the audio format, no camera availability today, and to be honest, I really enjoy it. I alluded to it in the last show. The last show was the first uploaded audio-only show, and it's not that I hate being in front of a camera, but like I said on the show, and I don't want to repeat too much because I don't like repeating myself when it's not necessary, but like I said on the last show, I feel like I'm a radio guy. I really do. It's not that I mind being in front of a camera, it's just that I'm more natural behind the microphone and no visual aid whatsoever. So here we go, segment number 2, and we start with some news from Major League Baseball. World Series going on. 2 games down, and, well, it's a split. And both teams are pretty even. I don't think this comes as a huge surprise. It's not that surprising to me that St. Louis grabbed a game in Fenway. Because St. Louis is pretty good on the road, especially in the playoffs. They're a very good October team. They're not going to go away easily. Now, I've said that I think Boston is going to win this series. I still believe that. I still believe they're going to win in 6, just like I said. This next game is going to be interesting, though. And the reason it's going to be interesting is for all of the good pitching we've had in the playoffs, this is a really, really bad pitching matchup coming on up tomorrow. Jake Peavy and Joe Kelly have been very hittable in the postseason. And so you couple that with the fact that in this World Series, only one pitcher, John Lester of Boston, has gone 7 innings or more in a game. This could be very interesting. It could be a very interesting series if that trend continues tomorrow where both teams are having to exhaust their bullpen. Because both teams' bullpens are really, really good. But any manager will tell you that regardless of the strength of the bullpen, they want to go as long as they can, particularly in a long series like this. They want to go as long as they can with their starters, and it makes sense. All right, you want to go as long with your starters as you can because you pretty much rely on the same 3 or 4 guys out of your bullpen every single game at this point. All right, we've even seen starters. I believe Ryan Dempster closed a game. Didn't he close game 1? I believe so. I'll have to look that up for a second. But regardless, the dynamic of the postseason and the regular season is different in many ways, but in some ways it's the same. And one thing that's the same is you want to go as deep with your starters as you possibly can. So I think the team that's going to win this game tonight, or tomorrow night, excuse me, this is Friday, not Saturday. The team that's going to win is the team that jumps out on the opposing starting pitcher early. And I was right, by the way. Ryan Dempster did, in fact, close game 1. Whoever gets an early jump on that pitcher, and it could be either team, to be honest, is probably going to win this game. And more importantly than that, they are going to have an advantage for the rest of the series. Now, I think it's going to be Boston. Okay, Boston has not lost back-to-back games in the postseason. I have beaten this statement to a dead horse. Or I've beaten this statement like a dead horse. That they are the most well-rounded team in baseball. And well-rounded teams, frankly, win a lot of games. That's an obvious statement. Okay? I think Boston comes away with a win here. Now, whoever wins this game has not automatically won the entire thing. Okay, there's still a lot of baseball left to be played regardless of what happens on Saturday. What it will do is you will have a couple of advantages. Number one, you will have an advantage, obviously, in the series. Whoever wins this game will be up 2-1. But also, you will have an advantage in the condition of your bullpen. You just will. Speaking of advantages, John Clayton is an NFL insider for ESPN, and he talked about how much of an advantage it seems like offenses have in the NFL in closing moments of the game. He said that, and there's been a recent trend where it almost seems like game-winning drives are so common that they've kind of lost their luster. Because, see, when I started watching the NFL, here was the thing. The only people that had game-winning drives were old, experienced, veteran guys. They had the advantage in a game-winning situation because there was so much pressure. Well, now you see all of these young guys who are going out and winning football games in the closing moments. All right, you have guys like Andrew Luck, 9 game-winning drives in his career. All right, the dude has only played 23 games. That blows my mind, okay? In over a third of his games, and really, almost half of his games, he has a game-winning drive in the fourth quarter or overtime. Then you have Russell Wilson had 7 in his career. All right, and overall, there have been 37 this year. 37 game-winning drives in the fourth quarter or overtime. All right? There were 80 last year. That's one trend that we've noticed, okay? A lot of game-winning drives. And I think part of that, too, has to do with the fact that, frankly, the spread in talent in the NFL is not as wide as it used to be. I started watching football in the John Elway days, okay, where it was Denver, and then there was like that group of 3 or 4 teams, the Minnesotas, the Atlantas, the Green Bays of this world. And then, like, Denver was on their own, and then it was that secondary group, and then it was everybody else. And then, everybody else had their own sets of groups. Okay, I mean, in the early 90s, the Buffalo Bills went to the Super Bowl 4 straight times, for crying out loud. Okay, how much of a divide was there between them and everybody else in the AFC? Now, though, you see teams like Pittsburgh, for instance, who go from winning a Super Bowl to, in a couple of years later, being an absolutely terrible team. Same with the Giants. All right, the Patriots are not the powerhouse they once were. Green Bay has shown signs of weakness. Meanwhile, you have teams that spring up every year, the Chicagos, the Detroits, Seattle and San Francisco from a few years ago, they're here to stay. Atlanta, even though they're having kind of a poor season this year. Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington. It's a mad scramble to try and figure out who's going to win each year because, frankly, almost anybody could. And then you have Denver, who everybody accepted as the best team in the country, and I still think they are, but, everybody accepted that. They're not even number one in their own division right now. Freaking Kansas City, who won 2 games last year and replaced their head coach and starting quarterback. Granted, they were upgrades at both levels, but, they could add a complete overhaul and have a chance Sunday against Cleveland to quadruple their winning total from a season ago, halfway through the season. All right, so it's bizarre, okay? A lot of close games. Another thing is the preparation in college for the professional game is so far beyond what it used to be. Used to, college and the NFL were 2 totally different factions, 2 totally different styles of play. In college you had like the West Coast, the spread, the option, and then in the NFL it was all pro style under center. And now you see the NFL kind of adopting this spread offense, read option that Washington and others use. And you also see college having more pro-style offenses. Okay, so guys are more prepared, and the pressure of the NFL doesn't really get to them as easily. It still gets to them a little bit, but not nearly as easily as it used to. But another trend that you're seeing, and this helps quarterbacks so much, especially young ones, the protection of the quarterbacks by the league and the development of just monster wide receivers and tight ends. Okay, you have guys like Calvin Johnson, Andre Johnson, at tight end Jimmy Graham, Jermichael Finley, Dallas Clark, Jason Witten. Speaking of the Cowboys, Des Bryant. Okay, guys who are here to stay in the league. And then you have guys like Miles Austin and Austin Collie pop up every now and then and just have sensational seasons. Okay, wide receivers are getting better. There are rules in place like no targeting that allow a wide receiver to pretty much go airborne without fear of getting drilled. And then you have quarterbacks who are pretty much babied in the pocket by the league. I'm not criticizing the the safety implications here. I like the fact that the league is, trying to be safer. I'm just saying that coupled with the increased preparation, the increased athleticism of quarterbacks, you didn't see guys like Andrew Luck who are pocket passers but could also run like 4.6 40s. Or RG3, who's a self-declared pocket passer but can run a 4.4 when he has two good knees. All that coupled together, you are seeing just a boom in the passing game. But here's one thing that not many people are noticing. When I started watching the NFL, there were guys like Sean Alexander and Jerome Bettis and LaDainian Tomlinson. You just handed the ball off to him 25, 30 times a game. One guy. There is only one running back in the NFL right now. LaShawn McCoy, who is averaging over 20 rushing attempts a game. Okay, think about that development. We have gone so pass-oriented, okay? Some teams like Green Bay, even though now they have Eddie Lacy at running back, who's pretty good. But think of Green Bay a few years ago when they just did not have a running game at all. Okay, their short passing game was their running game, if that makes any sense. Okay, their short pass set up their long pass. Like, halfback dives have become wide receiver screens. Okay, if you don't believe me, watch the NFL and watch a pass-happy team like a Green Bay or a New Orleans or somebody else that incorporates a mixture, a plethora of screens, deep passes, mid-range stuff. They still run the ball. The running game hasn't gone away completely. I'm not saying that we're en route to a 100% everybody passes, the running game goes obsolete kind of deal. But the progression is very, very interesting. Because the idea of a workhorse running back in today's day and age, in today's game, is pretty much non-existent and pretty much useless. Okay, guys like Jamal Charles, Maurice Jones-Drew, what Ray Rice was a couple of years ago, Arian Foster, Frank Gore. 10 years from now, those kinds of running backs, the ones that you could depend on, maybe not this year with Ray Rice, but in the past you could depend on 20, 25 games, rushing attempts a game. You're not going to see that anymore, I don't think. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just what it is. It's like, fall progressing to winter. It's not whether or not it's good or bad. It's just the cycle of things. It's what happens. But speaking of the NFL, last night, Thursday night football, was a completely and totally and utterly terrible game in every way, shape, or form. Okay, what we have found out about Tampa Bay, Carolina played Tampa Bay, for those of you that don't know. Carolina beat them 31-13, and the only reason it was even that close is because Tampa Bay scored a meaningless touchdown with 3 minutes left in the game. If you want to be technical, 2:53. Okay, last night we all saw once and for all that Tampa Bay is awful. Okay, Carolina is not that good of a team. Don't let their 4-3 record get you up in arms and fool you, okay? They have beaten St. Louis, the New York Giants, and who's the other team that they beat coming into this game? I wrote it down here somewhere. It's Giants, Vikings. Okay, Vikings were the other team. Okay, so Carolina is not that good. Tampa Bay has yet to win a game. Carolina comes into the game 3-3, but they've only beaten lack of competition. Okay, so here's a chance for Tampa Bay to finally get their win, finally prove that they have some kind of an identity outside of the NFC doormat, which used to be the Giants, but at least they've won a game. Here's their chance to finally go out and win a game. Here's a chance for Mike Glennon to prove he's supposed to be a starting quarterback. Here's a chance for Greg Schiano to prove that he should be a coach in the NFL. And what do? They have 48 yards rushing for the entire game. The entire game, 48 yards rushing. Okay, Cam Newton had more yards than that by himself. Okay, this team is so bad. They are 26th in the NFL in rushing first downs with 27. They're 24th in the league on third down conversion percentage, 35.5. And they're barely over 40% on fourth down conversion. So basically, if it's a must get the first down, you may as well punt it because they're not getting it. And they're the second most penalized team in infractions with 57, and they're first in penalty yards with 537. Now, all of those stats other than the penalties say to me that this team is just not very talented, and they're not. Okay, they have Darrelle Revis. They have Deshaun Golson. Big whoop. Okay, Mike Glennon is their starting quarterback, and there's no way I can foresee him being a long-term starting quarterback anywhere. And I hesitate to use statements such as the it factor because it seems like a cop-out. Well, I know he's not any good. I just don't know why, so I'm just going to say the it factor. He doesn't have it. It's a way for guys like me to basically say they don't know what they're talking about, and they can't put their finger on it. I can't put my finger on why I don't believe that Mike Glennon is a long-term starting quarterback anywhere. But I can go ahead and tell you right now that my takeaway of him is exactly that. He's not a long-term starting quarterback. So you don't have a good team. If that was it, then I would say let Greg Schiano stay, let him improve on the team, and we'll see how they play next year. Because I'm a patient guy. I believe in letting the same guy build a team, build the chemistry within that team, and move forward. But there have been reports that the chemistry of that team, the locker room, is pretty much in shambles. And then to top it off, they can't execute on third and fourth down. They are heavily penalized. And that tells me that this team lacks discipline. And that is on the coach foremost. I'm not saying that it's only Greg Schiano's fault. But to have just a bad team is one thing. Okay, Jacksonville has a bad team. At least they try. At least they don't always shoot themselves in the foot. At least they don't always do something stupid. They're just not talented. Tampa Bay is not talented, and they don't try. So basically, they aren't very good. Their roster needs an overhaul, but so does their coaching staff. And I'm not alone in this opinion. Mark Schlereth of ESPN had this to say about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their head coach, Greg Schiano. Take a listen.
The seat is incredibly hot for Greg Schiano.
How do they turn it around in Tampa?
Fire everybody and start from scratch.
Okay.
Now, whether or not he was actually 100% serious about that, we don't know. He sounded just a little sarcastic, a little kidding. But to even hint at that, to even joke at the solution of this team is to start all over again, to just fire everyone. From top to bottom, everybody gone, go away. if I'm the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization, I look at that and I go, wow, we are a bad football team. And they are. So, with all of the weaknesses of this team, physically, athletically, mentally, Greg Schiano has to be gone after this year. And honestly, like, in my opinion, he's definitely going to be fired after this year. That is if he even lasts for the entire year. Okay, this may be a mid-season firing. And there have been rumors that they already have an interim head coach in place. Their special teams coordinator, can't remember his name off the top of my head, but their special teams coordinator, apparently, according to a few sources, is lined up to be the interim head coach if Greg Schiano's coaching ability or lack thereof proves itself to be insufficient. Another head coach that I think should probably be fired is Leslie Frazier. And look, Minnesota under his tenure is 16-22, and by Minnesota standards, outside of having Randy Moss and Dante Culpepper, that's pretty good. Here's the thing, though. Leslie Frazier gets the incredible benefit of having Adrian Peterson and Jared Allen. Okay, especially AP pretty much puts this team on his back, and any time they win, it's because of him. And anytime they're competitive, it's because of him. And then you have guys like Leslie Frazier, who decide to start a quarterback who hasn't even been on the team for 2 weeks. And that guy goes 20 of 53, looks completely lost, and makes an idiot of himself. Now, there is a certain point where when you say, okay, 20 of 53, that's a little bit of execution on Josh Freeman's part. And Josh Freeman, as you know, is the former quarterback of the of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and is now with the Minnesota Vikings. I get that a little bit of that is execution on his part, or lack thereof. But at the same time, who starts a guy who hasn't even been on the team in 2 weeks? Nobody does that. Nobody. And if you do, you had better make sure that your playbook is so simple that a 5th grader could pick it up and understand what the hell is going on. Because playbooks, especially in the NFL, are so complicated that you need more than 2 weeks to study for it and to be prepared. And they didn't give him enough time, and he went out and made an utter idiot of himself. And they ended up losing the game in an embarrassing way to the Giants, who were also terrible. So it's because of decisions like that and the fact that he can't win with a guy like Adrian Peterson that I just think he needs to go. I think he needs to go. I think they need to bring in somebody else who's willing to put this team on the back of Adrian Peterson. Hopefully they can get a good quarterback for whoever it is. I just don't think Leslie Frazier knows enough about the NFL to actually coach. Now, a lot of people want to put Gus Bradley, head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, on the hot seat. To anyone wanting to put him on the hot seat, do yourself a favor and go just sit in an electric chair. Don't actually turn it on. Okay, I'm not telling you to kill yourself, but actually just go and sit on the electric chair. And while you're on the electric chair, have someone hand you Play-Doh and say, this Play-Doh has to withstand a rocket missile like Jericho from the first Iron Man. It has to withstand that. It has to be perfectly intact, or you're getting electrocuted. Now, again, do not electrocute yourself. And have this person be a friend, because you know this isn't going to work. Okay, you would have a greater chance of having Play-Doh withstand a bomb and be perfectly intact and win with this Jacksonville Jaguars team. And here's why. They are awful. They are just awful. That is the most untalented NFL team I have seen that's not a Cleveland Browns team. And I should know I was a Cleveland Browns fan as long as Tim Couch was their quarterback. I love Kentucky football. Tim Couch was the first guy since I started watching to actually do anything in the NFL besides Craig East. And for some reason, I just didn't want to be a Cincinnati fan. I don't know. But no one could win with this team. Vince Lombardi could not win with this team. Okay, because there's a certain point where you actually have to have talent on your team before you start thinking that maybe we should fire the coach. And in all honesty, I think Gus Bradley has done a phenomenal job. I've watched Jacksonville play. I watched their game against Indianapolis. They ended up losing that game 37-3. It was a blowout. It wasn't close. But the first half was close. Okay, Jacksonville is a young team. They're the 5th youngest total roster at the beginning of the season. The average age of a player on their team, 25 years, 5 months. A team like that is going to need time to grow. They're going to need time to develop, and they should have time to develop under the same head coach. And what I've seen out of this team, especially in that game that I saw against Indianapolis, they may not win a single game this year, but they have more passion and more drive to win than a lot of teams in the league. At least they try. At least they get better week in, week out, game in, game out, play in, play out. They're always learning. And I attribute that in part to the coach instilling a belief in winning in an organization that has not experienced that phenomenon in a long, long time. Speaking of attitudes about winning, it was hinted that Mark Stoops, when he took over the helm at the University of Kentucky, it was hinted that Mark Stoops actually believed this team could win and instilled an attitude in the team that they could win. They haven't done much of it, okay? They've only won one game against a Miami of Ohio team that just sucks. But they're getting better. Okay, I watched their game last night, at least the second half of it, because the first half I was writing a 10-page paper for one of my classes. It about killed me that I missed Kentucky football on a Thursday night. But I had to, so sorry to UK fandom for letting you down for not watching the first 38 minutes of that game. I sincerely apologize from the bottom of my heart, and I hope I'm not going to sports fan hell for that. But anyway, so I watched that game, the second half of it. The second half was pretty good. Okay, I figured a couple of things were going to happen. Dual threat quarterbacks have always been the Achilles heel to Kentucky football ever since I can remember. Okay, we've never been able to stop one on a consistent basis. And so Prescott came in. He's a great running quarterback. He's a decent throwing quarterback. Kentucky's got a good pass rush, but they don't have a very good defensive backfield. And you know, that's one of the youngest defensive backfields that I think is probably in the country right now. You know, so you can't really fault them for being bad. They just lack the experience, okay? So what was probably going to happen was Kentucky was going to have to bring pressure. They were going to have to do one of two things. They were either A, going to have to bring pressure on Prescott, hope that they get home, and ease the job on the passing defense that way. Or they were going to have to have 6, 7 guys, maybe even 8 sometimes, drop back in coverage and hope for the best. Prescott ate us alive. Okay, he didn't have a lot of gaudy stats, but the 2 touchdowns throwing, the 1 touchdown receiving on the wide receiver sweep, and then he ran a wheel route out to the side and was wide open. Those were dagger plays. Okay, I figured coming into this game he was going to have a good day. I figured Perkins was going to come in and have a good day. He actually didn't do a whole lot. You know, Perkins, their leading rusher, 12 carries, 65 yards. But I figured Kentucky was going to have a tough time with this game, and what was probably going to happen was similar to South Carolina. They were going to get down early, have a good second half, come up a little bit short. That's exactly what happened. They're 1-6. I know the start has not been glamorous, and I know some Kentucky fans are already reverting to the excitement that is to come with basketball because they realize that this football season is gone. No, it's not gone. Our chances of going to a bowl are gone. Obviously, they were never there. Okay, our chances of having a winning season are gone. Same thing. Our chances of winning a game in the SEC, probably gone. Again, they weren't really there. What we all need to watch, and I've said this before, what we all need to watch in this Kentucky football team is improvement. They're a very young team. If all of those young guys continue to improve the rate that they have for the rest of the season, into the offseason, and you couple that with the fact that they have a phenomenal class coming in next year, not just by Kentucky standards, but by national standards, you could see a pretty good football team next year. And by pretty good, I mean at least 4 wins. That would be impressive. Okay, I still think Kentucky is 2 years after this season away from a bowl game. But they have improved so much. And I have to admit, I was a little disappointed at the end of the game when Maxwell Smith let the pass sail on 4th and 7. But overall, I was smiling. I was happy about that game. Because this team looks absolutely nothing at all similar to what they looked like in that beatdown against Western Kentucky in Game 1. And that's the improvement that I'm talking about. If this Kentucky team plays that Western Kentucky team again, they beat them. That's how much we've improved. Okay, so don't incriminate Mark Stoops. Don't give up on this Kentucky football team is basically what I'm saying. Okay, if your hopes were to get to a bowl game, then don't watch Kentucky football again because you're obviously unrealistic. Just don't do it. Don't put yourself through that kind of torture. Continue to be a diehard Kentucky basketball fan and not give a crap about the football team at all. If that's your attitude. If you were honestly expecting a bowl game this year, or any more than 3 wins, or 2, like I was. But if your expectation, like mine, was improvement week in and week out, and game in and game out, and play in and play out, then despite the fact that we're 1-6 and winless in the conference, you have got to feel excited about how this team is done. Because at the end of the day, I'm not one to say that there are moral victories because I think that's just a cheesy way of saying, kind of like in elementary school when we all played Little League, oh, everybody's a winner regardless of the scoreboard. I'm not quite a believer in moral victories just yet. What I will say is there are certain positives you can take away from a loss. And you're seeing a lot of those. JoJo Kemp is a potential NFL starting running back. He is. He went up against a very, very good Mississippi State rushing defense and put up 63 yards on 15 carries. I know that's not phenomenal, but he's a freshman. He's a freshman who runs low, runs hard, squares his shoulders at the point of attack, doesn't fumble the football, and can also catch out of the backfield, and in time, he probably will block a little bit. Then you have guys like Ryan Timmons, who are just freaking amazing track stars who can rip off 51-yard screen passes for touchdowns and leave everybody in the dust. You have a guy like Drew Parker who's coming in next year, phenomenal quarterback supposedly. The only reason I say supposedly is I'm a little doubtful because, I'm hearing all the same things about him that I heard out of Patrick Tolles. So that's left to be seen. But then you have defensive guys like Bud Dupree who just went insane last night. Zadarius Smith is a phenomenal pass rusher, and I know that the defensive backfield is in absolute shambles, but so what? All right, it's not about necessarily winning right now. It's about improving so you can win in the future. That's what it's about. And overall, I was very pleased. So Kentucky had their game Thursday night. Louisville has their game tomorrow. I went on an absolute rant about Louisville football, kind of like what my roommate who just entered the studio is doing to my back right now. Like, I literally busted them apart. Now, I basically got on the air and... Okay, I'm going to have to address this. Steven, what are you doing?
Yes! I got in the break finally. It's funny because my phone just filled up and like I had no more space.
So, yeah, my roommate about broke the chair in here. My producer's just laughing at me, and I'm sitting here with, like, finger fungus or whatever in my mouth. I don't know what's going on. It's poop. Oh, apparently it's poop. Okay. So, anyway, after that awful experience, speaking of awful experiences, I was talking about Louisville last week, right? And they had one of the worst games for a top 10 team I've ever seen in my life. And, I just went on it. I'm not taking anything that I said back, all right? Because everything that I said, in my opinion, was true and correct and accurate. Okay, Teddy Bridgewater is no longer in the Heisman race. Louisville is no longer in the BCS championship race. But they still have a good chance of winning the American Athletic Conference, which is just a god-awful conference. And they play South Florida tomorrow, who's not that good. Their offense is woeful. I mean, the Bulls are third worst in the country in total offense, 258.5 yards per game. And they're fourth worst in scoring at 16.2. So you have an awful offense, which means that you are probably, as long as your defense holds up and does what they're supposed to do, like the first half against Central Florida, as long as the defense does what they're supposed to do, you're going to be in a very good position to give your offense, which is a highly powered one, a lot of good field position. And then it's not like the defense of South Florida is great. I mean, they're about as porous as anything Louisville's seen up to this point, outside of probably Florida International. What is it about teams in Florida that Louisville plays who are just terrible overall? Anyway, Louisville's going to roll in this game. I predicted 45-7. It could honestly be worse than that, and I would not be surprised. Because Louisville is going to, if I know Louisville at all, which I may not because I said they were going to run the table and Teddy Bridgewater was going to win the Heisman. But if I know Louisville even a little bit, they're going to absolutely beat the crap out of South Florida. And they're going to do it in such an awful way because they're going to be so pissed off after losing against Central Florida at home after having a 28-7 lead. And here I go on my soapbox again. I better get off of that before I just rant. Or before my roommate kills me, apparently, because he's still here. This game's not going to be close. I'm predicting 45-7. The other team from the state that's having a game tomorrow, Western Kentucky. Now, Western Kentucky is also a team that I've been a little frustrated with, in part because for some reason I don't think that they actually recognize what kind of a talent they have with Antonio Andrews. And also in part because they don't show up for some games. Okay, they played Louisiana Monroe, who was supposed to win the Sun Belt. And they're on the road, and everybody says ULM, the Warhawks, are going to win. And Western Kentucky beats them up at their place. Then they come back home against Louisiana Lafayette and just, for whatever reason, decide they don't want to play today. And they lose 37-20 at home. And I'm sitting here going, if y'all would just realize how good you could be and stop pissing me off, then you could win this conference without a problem. Now, in saying that, they play Troy. Troy is a very good team by Sun Belt Conference standards, I guess. Okay, they have a very, very good offense. They average almost 34 points a game. Okay, very, very highly powered, potent offensive attack. Meanwhile, you have Western Kentucky, who's got a great offensive line and a great running attack spearheaded by Antonio Andrews. If Western Kentucky is going to win this game, and I think they will, what they have to do is they have to run the football. And I think they will, because apparently 3 different starting quarterbacks took first-team snaps in practice, and it still hasn't been decided who's going to be the starting quarterback of this game. Now, I think that you go with Dowdy in the long run. You go with Dowdy because he's the best team manager on this team. He's the best team managing quarterback on this team. He's great when you only ask him to throw the ball 15, 20 times a game. But if you go out and you ask him to win a game for you like they did against Tennessee, it obviously doesn't work. Dowdy is a game manager. So put him at the starting quarterback position for the rest of the season. Have him throw 15, 20 times a game and just run with Antonio Andrews, because as long as the offensive line does their job, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to win with a running back like he is, especially in the Sun Belt. So look for whoever's the quarterback. Did not throw a lot, hopefully. Look for Antonio Andrews. I hope to have a field day. I'd expect him to have at least 2 rushing touchdowns tomorrow. Hilltoppers win 24-16. Now, as far as the national spectrum is concerned, there are a couple of good games. UCLA-Oregon's getting a lot of hype. I'm not really sure why, because honestly, I don't think this game's going to be that close. And it's not because UCLA is bad, it's because they're young. And we saw what happened last week against Stanford when they went on the road and they just clearly, offensively especially, weren't prepared for that kind of environment. Without Jordan James, this offense just is not what it used to be. Okay, Brett Hundley tends to look lost at times on the road. I referenced the first half of that game against Nebraska when he was just hideous. And the Oregon defense, for all of the accolades that the offense is getting, and rightfully so, they're really flying under the radar. Okay, nobody is talking about how good Oregon's defense is. Yet they are giving up so few points, and this is impressive for so many reasons, primarily because their offense is so good and so highly powered and so quick to score the football that to be 12th in the country, giving up only 17 points a game, is phenomenal. UCLA has not seen a defense like this. They certainly haven't seen an offense like this. And when I say defense, I don't mean that this is the best defense that they've ever seen. I think Stanford takes that bill. But this is the quickest defense that they have ever seen. And I think that quickness of the defense, compounded with the fact that Oregon's just going to score a ton, is going to frustrate this young UCLA team. Ducks roll 52-21. And again, that's not because UCLA is a bad team. I think they're a pretty good team. I still think that they're going to probably be, if not the South representative in the Pac-12 championship game, pretty close to that. Because the only teams they have to compete with are like Arizona State and USC if they ever decide to do anything, which they probably won't. I mean, they left their former head coach at an airport, for crying out loud. Then speaking of Stanford, you have Stanford, who's number 6 in the country, at Oregon State. And this is a matchup of two teams that are so completely different. I mean, it's like fire and ice going against each other. I just have no idea what's going to happen. I'm the kind of guy, though, that believes that defense wins games, defense wins championships. And frankly, Oregon State is a very one-dimensional offensive attack. Now, that one dimension is pretty darn good. Okay, they have the best passing attack in the country. 442 yards a game. They have the best quarterback that's not being talked about in Sean Mannion. I mean, he's thrown for almost 3,000 yards already. And this is going to be, what, their 7th game? 8th game. They're 6-1. Stanford, meanwhile, prides itself in forcing opposing offenses to be one-dimensional. Now, they usually prefer to take away the run. In this case, they're not going to have to. Okay, they're not going to have to because Oregon State just doesn't run the football, period. And there's no need to start now. I mean, they don't have a guy on the season who's ran for 200 yards yet on the entire season. So Stanford's not going to have to even concentrate at all on Oregon State's non-existent rushing attack. They can just go head first at Sean Mannion. And they're very, very good at frustrating quarterbacks. We saw last year against Oregon. They beat Oregon. Just because their front seven was that physical. And I think this front seven is going to once again frustrate their opponent, in this case Oregon State, and they're going to pull out a very, very close win. If it's a close game, Stanford will win. If it becomes anything remotely similar to a shootout, and I'm talking anything more than 30 points for each team, Oregon State wins. But I just don't anticipate that. Speaking of things I don't anticipate, a lot of people are predicting that Oklahoma is going to beat Texas Tech. Look, Blake Bell was great whenever all he had to do was run the ball in get-a-yard situations. Just like Tim Tebow was great when all he had to do was sit behind Chris Leak and go in and just run the ball. And occasionally deceive opposing defenses into believing that he can throw it a little bit. But then you have games like Texas that prove that Blake Bell cannot throw the ball. Because what was Texas's game plan? Okay, they said, we're going to take away your running game. We're going to make you beat us through the air, and look what happened. Okay, Blake Bell accounted for, between his passing yards and rushing yards, a little over 100. Like 107. And Oklahoma looked absolutely awful and ended up losing the game and probably saving Mac Brown's job. But a lot of people are predicting Oklahoma to win. I just don't see it happening. Now, Texas Tech statistically has a better defense than Texas. Probably doesn't have a better defense than Texas because, in all honesty, though, the Longhorns have played a lot better teams. But they still don't have a bad defense. So they're probably going to have the same approach that Texas did. What they are going to do, though, in addition to what the Longhorns did against the Sooners, is they are going to score a crap ton. Because that's what Texas Tech does. They score the football. They put up points. The Red Raiders are averaging over 40 a game. And regardless of the defense that he's facing, if you ask Blake Bell in crunch time, in a conference game, to put up over 40 points, to lead an offense to outscore another one, it's just not going to happen. The other team that I can't buy into, Missouri. Look, I know they're 7-0. I know they're unblemished, at least in their record. They have yet to prove to me, though, that they're a very good team. And the reason they have yet to prove that to me, is because they haven't really played anybody. I mean, Georgia was so riddled with injuries. And then Florida only has a defense. And that defense did not get to see any tape of a backup quarterback who proved to be okay. Missouri's without their starting quarterback, James Franklin. And South Carolina's probably the most complete team that they've faced all year. So you add those things together. You add the fact that South Carolina, now granted, they don't have their starting quarterback either. Or at least I don't think they're going to have him. He was listed as doubtful, Connor Shaw. But they don't have a bad backup quarterback, and they have a great running back who's going to take some pressure off of the youngster, or at least the guy who's inexperienced, in Mike Davis. And Jadeveon Clowney is probably the best athlete that this Missouri offense, especially the offensive line, will ever see in their life. But yet, I'm supposed to predict Missouri, that's conventional wisdom, in a game at home with a backup quarterback and an unproven team all in all. I'm just not going to do it. Okay, if Missouri goes out and beats South Carolina and does it in a convicting manner, then fine. I'm going to be on the Tigers bandwagon. But until they do that against a well-rounded team like a South Carolina that's not completely dogged with injury, then I'm not going to believe in them as a legitimate BCS title contender. I'm just not going to do it. So as far as the NFL on Sunday, though, that covers what's going on Saturday. I've already covered that with the World Series Game 3 going on Saturday with some big college football games coming up. Sunday, I may just sleep all day. Look, if you're like me and you haven't had a lot of sleep over this week, and you're wondering if there are going to be any quality NFL games going on, do yourself a favor. Don't set an alarm unless you're a churchgoer, don't set an alarm until 4:05 Eastern Time when the New York Jets take on the Cincinnati Bengals, because that's probably going to be the only good game. Okay, and here's what I'm saying, okay? Kansas City, the only undefeated team left. They play Cleveland. Now, I don't expect the Chiefs to run Cleveland out of the building. They never really do that. But I don't expect Cleveland to beat them. I sure as hell don't expect that. Okay, Whedon in no way is prepared for that kind of a defense. Now, granted, the Chiefs have only won by 2 touchdowns, 3 times this season, and they've only scored 30 points or more in a game once. But Cleveland's not going to win. It's going to be a close game on the scoreboard, just because that's how the Chiefs play. They're kind of like Atlanta was last year. Or, 2 years ago. Go 13-3, but don't really beat anybody that badly. So with all that said, the Chiefs win. They win easily as far as the game's concerned. The scoreboard's not going to read that huge a spread. 23-10, I think, is a safe bet. Another game that people might try and advertise as decent, Miami at New England. I have such a hard time believing this is going to be a good game. Look, the Dolphins have not won in over a month. And even when they started 3-0, they did not look that good. They got outgained in every single game in that 3-game winning streak to start the season. Their quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, was virtually molested in the backfield as their offensive line gave up 14 sacks. And at least 4 in every single one of those games. And New England looks a lot better. That defense is pretty good. Gronk is back. They might get Danny Amendola back. Regardless of that, Tom Brady finally looks at least a little bit calmer than he was at the beginning of the season. So there's no way I foresee the Dolphins winning this game. There's no way. Especially after the Patriots lost in overtime against the Jets. Okay, so I don't expect this game to be that close. My prediction on the score, 31-13 New England wins. It's probably not even going to feel that close. Just because of all of the added weapons and the fact that Miami, despite the fact that they started the season well, as far as their record is concerned, really isn't that good of a team. The Giants and Eagles was probably the most even game as far as the NFC is concerned, just because both teams really aren't that great. Okay, the Giants finally got a win. They finally got a win. And the Eagles' defense actually looked pretty good last week. They only surrendered 17 points against Dallas. None in the first half. And this was after Dallas nearly beat the Denver Broncos. The Eagles have a very good defense. They're probably going to frustrate Eli quite a bit. And when Eli is frustrated, he makes mistakes. We've seen that all year. I would not be surprised at all to see him throw at least 3 interceptions this game. Maybe more. He could account for 5-6 turnovers for all I know. And it doesn't help that David Wilson's your starting running back. And just like I don't foresee Mike Glennon being a starting quarterback anywhere, there's no way that David Wilson is starting running back material. There's just no way. Okay, I realize the guy's a rookie, but seriously, there's no forgiveness. There's no 3 or 4 year grace period like you saw guys like Aaron Rodgers get, where they can just sit behind Brett Favre. No, you've got to prove that you at least have something to bring to the table right away. David Wilson, the only thing that he's proved is he has butterfingers. With that said, I think the high of winning their first game dies out officially. The Giants get pummeled on offense. And regardless of whether or not Vic comes back, the Eagles are going to win this game. Nick Foles, if he has to start, will win against the Giants. That's how bad the Giants are. So I have the Eagles 20-7. That's really an average of my two predictions. If Michael Vick is ready to go, it could probably be 35-7. And if he's not, and Nick Foles has to go, it could be 10-7. So 20-7 is kind of like an in-between prediction, just because we don't officially know. But really, as I said, the best game of Sunday, Cincinnati and New York. Both teams are coming off 3-point wins. The Jets, as I stated previously, beat the Patriots in overtime by 3. Okay, Geno Smith is up to 4 game-winning drives in the fourth quarter or overtime. Another one of those young guys that John Clayton was talking about that is not afraid to win games late. And meanwhile, the Bengals picked up a very, very quality win on the road, 27-24 against the Lions. The Bengals look to have finally righted their ship, particularly on defense, in this 3-game winning streak. And that defense is good, both in passing and rushing yards, but especially rushing yards, because they only give up just under 78 rushing yards a game. With that said, I still think that the offense for the Cincinnati Bengals has a few questions to answer. Andy Dalton, he has something to prove. His starting job is not in jeopardy, but his chance at being a legitimately good NFL quarterback, that's in jeopardy. Because if he comes out and kind of has a mediocre, lackluster game against a defense that's okay in the Jets, not phenomenal by any means, but okay. If he just has an average game and they win by a little bit, then I think that the luster around him and I'm sorry, first off, I need to back up. It wasn't the Bengals that give up 78 rushing yards a game. It's actually the Jets. I looked at the wrong team. Which makes my point about Andy Dalton that much more effective. Okay, they're probably not going to be able to run this game. So in order to win, they have to be able to throw the ball. And Andy Dalton has not had a terrible year. I'm not saying that. Okay, he's just a little bit under 2,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, 6 picks. Not that bad, but not that great. Okay, compare that to, his rookie year where he showed a lot of promise. Where he threw for almost 3,400 yards, and he had 20 touchdowns. And then his sophomore year, completed over 62% of his passes, had 3,600 yards. Actually, about 3,660. And 27 touchdowns. Okay, so he improved each of the first 2 years. And then this year, he hasn't been bad. His completion percentage is actually just south of 66. But he hasn't really done anything to say, wow, this guy's a future Hall of Famer, or wow, this guy's going to be remembered for a long time. In my opinion, he's going to kind of be like Carson Palmer, a decent quarterback who may have 1 or 2 good years every now and then, but the rest is just like, nothing special. He's got a lot to prove. Now, I think his team wins the game. I have Cincinnati winning 27-21. All right, I think it's going to be a close game. It's probably going to be a game that comes down to a game-winning drive. I can feel that. But I think something that's almost even more important for Andy Dalton and the future of this organization is the question of whether or not the quarterback that you have right now is a long-term star like you thought he could be when you brought him in. Because if he is, and if he proves that, then you can focus more draft picks, more trade talk, more of your attention on other facets of the game. Specifically, the defense. And that defense isn't bad, they're getting a little old. Okay, when James Harrison is one of the staples of your defense, you might want to consider using a few draft picks sometime in the future on that side of the ball. But if Andy Dalton is not a legitimate star, then it's not the question of whether you go out and draft another quarterback. It's the question of, do you need help around him in order to be a good team in the future? Is he good enough to win games with just A.J. Green and Jarvis Green-Ellis and an offensive line that's above mediocre? Or do you have to go out and get some guys on that side of the ball in order to be competitive with the other great offenses in the AFC and temporarily neglect some glaring needs on the defensive side of the ball? That's the question that can begin to be answered in one way or another tomorrow. Sunday. This has been a long week, folks. The first week back from fall break is so tough just because no one wants to be here. Okay, they realize how much college life just sucks. They want to go back home. This is the point in time where a bunch of freshmen just decide they can't do it anymore and they just drop everything and they just never come back. There are some days I wish I did that. Overall, I'm glad I stayed, obviously, but it's tough. It's tough to get back in the swing of things, and that showed because I cannot keep my day straight worth a darn. Like, I spent all morning Tuesday thinking it was Thursday. I spent all day Wednesday thinking it was Monday. Like, I was shotgunning all over the place. But anyway, Saturday's going to be good. I think Saturday's going to be fun. College football's got a lot of great games slated. Then you have the World Series. That's going to be fun. I'm probably going to make it a point to watch at least most of Game 3, regardless of what college football game is on at that time. Because this has been a fun playoffs in baseball. And if you're not following it, you are missing out. You are missing out on some good baseball. But until next time, I will enjoy my heavy metal music from a friend of mine back home. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'm going to see you next time.